Directed by Joanna Sanis, we are talking The KILLGRIN. And if you like the movie Smile, you may want to check this one out because it is somewhat similar in many ways. So this focuses on a young woman who seems to be having the most terrible luck, you might say, as a string of negative events seem to follow her. Starting with her partner, her boyfriend, committing suicide by jumping out of the window. And she is spiraling into depression and anxiety. And there seems to be a presence, some type of supernatural entity, possibly a KILLGRIN, that is haunting her, maybe being responsible for a variety of bad things, as we meet other characters, many of whom are depressed or otherwise have some type of anxiety through like a support group. We meet other characters who are in a similar situation and a dread destiny awaits them. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss The KILLGRIN. As they say, this movie is somewhat similar to the movie Smile in many ways, in some of its aesthetics and some of its storytelling. Let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. So I will say I think the acting is fairly solid in this movie. Everyone here does a pretty good job, and although this is clearly not a high budget movie, it still has a degree of professionalism, and I think our actors all do a decent enough job here in a kind of a horror movie, which is a little bit schlocky, but there are elements here that are dealing with, grief, anxiety, depression. So the movie does have some heavy themes, and I think our actors do a decent enough job handling them without making it seem kind of farcical or making light of these situations. And obviously a movie which ultimately deals with depression as a supernatural threat, you have to have some relatively decent acting to sell that, and I think this movie does succeed in this. I think for the most part, the movie has a somewhat slick and polished feel to it. As I've mentioned, I don't think this is a particularly high budget movie, but it still has a degree of production value that gives it a degree of polish. So you're not feeling like you're watching a rough and ready type of movie, and it does almost feel very much like a contemporary of the movie Smile, and it feels of that ilk, of that production value. So maybe not quite to the level of that, but not far off it, I would say. We do have a kind of a creature, and I think they have created a creature that will remind you of some pretty horrific imagery here. If you're a fan of the Warhammer universe, you may be thinking he looks a little like a Nurgle character, is the best way I would describe it. I have to say I'm not quite sure I was getting the link to depression necessarily, but nonetheless it's a pretty sort of grotesque looking demonic entity or whatever it's supposed to be. With kind of teeth that seem to be kind of coming out of open wounds and things like this and kind of falling out. The design here is grotesque but very kind of unusual looking. So that was pretty good. And I do think some of the kind of the VFX that are portrayed here are maybe a little bit derivative of Smile, it must be said, but we have these characters that seem to have their jaws kind of being ripped off and an unnatural grin across their face precedes this, and the effect is somewhat chilling, you might say, and very uncomfortable looking, one must say. So the movie has a lot going on sort of visually. I do think it has some themes that talk about kind of some kind of quite heavy subjects. And I think the acting is solid, and as I say, I think the story reminiscent of the movie Smile. So if you're a fan of that, then you may want to check it out. Where this maybe falls a little short, I think that the story is not as well handled as Smile. It seems there are elements to this story that either haven't been fully explained, plot threads that seemingly are just kind of left dangling, characters that are introduced that seemingly have the movie doesn't really know what to do with them. And I'll use this kind of like a police detective as one. We get two detectives that end up in this movie, and we're introduced to the second one a little later. And I think, he's spending a reasonable amount of time with this character. Is this going to be some type of, important plot point? Not really. And the movie sort of ends up switching between different characters. And I have to say, why are we with this character in certain times? So the movie seems a little unfocused, I have to say. Now, I will say, I got this movie as a screener sent to me. And when I get a movie sent to me via screener, I tend to go into it blind, really knowing nothing about it. I haven't read about it. I haven't watched the trailer. I haven't seen a poster. I have no idea what it is. All I get sent is, this is a horror movie. Okay, and I'll watch it. And I was watching this movie, and 20 to 25 minutes into this movie, I thought, I have no idea what this movie is about. And I actually had to stop it and read the synopsis, because I'm thinking, what is this movie actually about? Because I really felt like that first act of the movie was really unclear about what's this movie actually trying to say. Now, obviously, once I kind of read the synopsis, okay, fine. So, but as the film itself, I had to do kind of homework. Now, I doubt anyone is going to watch this movie without having no idea about what it is, like I did. But I didn't feel the story really took me on a ride. It didn't really take me on this journey. It was just kind of watching this woman going through seemingly a variety of depressing situations. And I have to say that a movie that deals in such kind of heady matter, mainly all the cast here are suffering from some type of trauma or debilitating anxiety or depression. It kind of feels a little depressing when you're watching it, I have to say, because this movie is not exactly filled with joy. It is a movie about depressed people, about a depression coming manifest, ultimately, and kind of the embodiment of depression as a kind of creature, as an entity that is there and will take its toll. And I think the visual metaphor for having this kind of depression as a sort of entity which is attached to you is clearly meant to establish this is what depression is like. I get it. But it's a little clumsily handled, I have to say. So this movie, I think, visually speaking, you could say it is sort of in line with the movie Smile, but the way the story is handled is done with less finesse here. It feels more clunky. It feels, not as evenly handily done, and maybe a little lack of experience here. So the film kind of ends up feeling a little bit like it needed another run on the script to me. It's a watchable film. I think, as I say, it maybe is a little bit too derivative of Smile. I'm not sure if it is particularly influenced by that, but you can't help but feel it's almost like somewhat of an imitation of it. Like I say, I think there's some interesting stuff here. I don't really think it sticks its head above the parapet and becomes its own entity necessarily, or a particularly sort of well-rounded movie overall, but it's still not a bad film, and I think there are some elements here that I think a lot of people could enjoy, but it never really rises above mediocrity. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts? If you said it, please let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.